Hello, this is Ralph from Happy Dog Training and welcome to another episode of Dog Talk. Today we're going to talk about service dogs. And we will have multiple episodes on different aspects of service dogs that are interesting for everybody if you have a service dog or not. But today we're going to focus on some very general things that are really applicable to everybody who walks around out there, because you will encounter service dogs. And I'd like to share with you some thoughts on what you shouldn't do with service dogs, because I see it all the time when I take our service dogs out during training, and when I see what people who have our service dogs deal with out in the public, what people report on social media about their encounters with people and their service dogs. So there is a lot of, let's say, bad behavior towards service dogs that is problematic. So why does this matter? Let me give just one example. There's many, but recently, well, I think a year or so ago, the FDA and airlines updated the requirements for a person to take a dog on an airplane. People now have to fill out forms. They have to provide information about who trained the dog. And you can self-train your service dog under law, so that's allowable. But on the form they're asking, and there's all kinds of hurdles that people with service dogs now have to jump through to be able to bring their service dog on a plane, because there has been so much abuse in the past. So many people who don't really have service dogs have taken them on planes, and a lot of them have misbehaved and even attacked people and bitten people, and that has led to a real crackdown. So that has led to the unfortunate fact that real emotional support animals no longer can fly on airplanes. They were allowed to, now they're not, because that is how people abuse the system. And now service dog owners, the ones with disabilities, the ones that are already struggling to get through the day, have to jump through additional hurdles to get their dog on a plane or other transportation, public transportation, simply because other people abused the system or did things that are not above board. So what I want to do in this episode is give a couple of pointers, not about airplanes, but about what you shouldn't do when you encounter with a person with a service dog in public. Because that is not a pet, that is a working animal. From a legal perspective, a service dog is like a wheelchair. That's why wheelchairs have wheelchair ramps. That's why there's wheelchair ramps on buildings, because of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. And there's a wheelchair ramp so the person with a wheelchair can get in. That is reasonable access, reasonable accommodation. A service dog is like a wheelchair. It is legally a piece of equipment. That's not how we think of our service dogs. There's nobody thinks of a dog as a piece of equipment. But in legal terms, and why a service dog has access rights is because he's legally or she's legally like a wheelchair. And I don't think you would go around touching other people's wheelchairs, so the same applies to a service dog. But so let's go step by step. So if you encounter a dog out in public, and I'm not talking to people with service dogs now, I'm talking to everybody else basically. So if you encounter a dog out in public, and the dog is wearing a service vest, and the vest has whatever indication on it, pretty good chance that's a service dog. Now, could that be a fake service dog? Sure. But it's not the job of just everybody to investigate that, ask questions, and harass the person with the dog. That's not the job of the average citizen. That is a question for a store owner when somebody wants to come in with a dog. That's a question for a business or for a hospital or for a medical facility or any other public building to potentially check if a dog brought in doesn't appear to be a legitimate service dog based on behavior. It's on people who have actually the right to check, to ask a few questions, and we'll get to those later. But it's not up to anybody who just sees a dog out there to investigate if that's real or not. So leave the service dog alone. You're likely looking at a person who has a disability of some sort. The disability may be visible. The disability may be invisible. It could be PTSD. It could be a seizure disorder. It could be diabetes. It could be a heart condition. None of these things are visible from the outside. That doesn't mean the person doesn't have a disability. don't bother people with service dogs. And if a dog wears a vest, just leave it be. The dog may be cute. Don't touch the dog. The dog may be absolutely adorable and look friendly and smile. Don't touch the dog. So it should be pretty straightforward that you shouldn't touch the dog. And I think, let's say most people probably get that part. I see oftentimes adults telling their kids that they shouldn't bother the dog once you make them aware that's a service dog. But they themselves don't look. That needs to be pointed out first. The dog clearly has a vest on. So if the dog has a vest on, and you see the dog has a vest on, just assume it's a service dog and leave the dog alone. It shouldn't require the service dog handler to tell you, hey, this is a service dog. He's wearing a piece of equipment that's not necessarily common on a pet, so in all likelihood, there is something different about this dog, and let's just assume he's a service dog in that regard. But I would say most parents I've seen, they're actually, the moment they realize, are acting responsibly for the most part. So I would say in my personal experience, 99% of parents stop their children from messing with a service dog. So kudos to those parents. But there are those who don't. And I'm not sure this message will reach them, but generally, if a dog wears a vest, just assume it's a service dog, leave him alone. But it goes further than not touching the dog. It goes a lot further than that. You should also not look at the dog. You can glance at the service dog and then look away. Don't stare at the dog. Now you may wonder, why can't I look? I just want to look. I'm not doing anything. Well, your looking could distract the dog. It depends on the dog's level of training. If that is distracting to the dog or not, depends also on the dog. A lot of people get their own service dog, they dabble around, they try, and they only reach a certain level of reliability. The dog may not be able to ignore a friendly person looking at them because he may be very social. That speaks, and there's lots to be said about the training of that dog and the background of that dog and so many other factors that come into that. But in that moment, if you're looking at a dog that can be distracted that way, and he is a real service dog, the dog may miss an alert. The person may have a heart episode. The dog may miss it because he's distracted, because you're looking at him and he's looking back and he's kind of checked out. That shouldn't happen with a real service dog, but it's possible. So when you look at a dog and stare at a service dog in public, you could increase the likelihood, or you are going to increase the likelihood that that dog misses an alert. And that alert could be a vital alert. It could be an alert that can save a person's life. Again, the training could have missed some things, it's possible, right? Or the dog has not had any maintenance in training, or when the dog started, he wasn't the right dog for some reason, only got to a certain level. All these things can be true. But still, in that moment, when you stare at the service dog, you're going to distract that service dog from working, and he could miss an alert, he could miss a task, and it could really seriously impact the person who needs the service dog. So even looking at the dog can be problematic. I mean, a glance to see if there's a vest is not what I'm talking about. I mean, staring and then commenting, oh, he is so cute. What a cute dog that is. He is so lovely. Those are the things that people will say, right? And that is distracting because now you're talking in the direction of the dog and you're talking at the person. You're not touching the dog, but you're talking to the dog. That's also disruptive, more disruptive than looking. Again, the dog could miss an alert. The person could literally die if the wrong circumstances come together. I'm not exaggerating. That could absolutely happen. Let's say the dog is alerting for the person to take a vital medication when certain body functions are getting out of whack, and the dog would normally detect that, but now you're distracting the dog by talking to it, and he misses that alert, misses to alert, misses to tell the person they need to take a medication, sit down or call for help, and boom, it can end very poorly. So just don't talk to service dogs, don't look at service dogs, don't touch service dogs. I know it's tempting, I know they're cute, I know they're adorable, but these are vital helpers. They get a person with a disability through their day because that's all they want to do. They want to get through their day. They don't want to be bothered. They'd much rather just have this dog at home as a pet and don't need him to work. They would be so much happier if they didn't have their disability and wouldn't need the helper. could just have a lovely pet at home. But they're having a service dog because they have a disability, visible or invisible, obvious to you or not, and anything that affects that ability's dog to work is a real problem. Just on a medical perspective, it can really have detrimental effects on a human being. So just keep that in mind, because I don't think anybody who is doing these things, talks to the service dog, looks at them, is thinking of this. And this is why I'm sharing this in this podcast. Most people they don't have bad intentions. They're not trying to harm anybody. They're just like admiring a beautiful animal. I get all that. But you could have a really bad impact on someone's health. And I don't think you want that. I really think most people do not want this. And by pointing it out, hopefully we can reduce the incidences somewhat. So service dogs are working dogs out in public doing vital jobs. If the disability of the person is obvious or not, is not relevant. Just assume any dog with a vest is a service dog. But not all service dogs wear vests, because legally they don't have to. And with some taskings, the vests may get in the way. It really depends. So just because a dog that is sitting next to a person in a doctor's office or sitting in a restaurant under a table doesn't wear a vest, doesn't mean that's not a legitimate service dog either. It just means that dog doesn't wear a vest. If he's in a restaurant that normally doesn't admit dogs, you can safely assume that when the person checked in, they were asked if this is a service dog, and they were only let in after they confirmed so and provided some additional information about why this dog is here. Because there's two questions that businesses get to ask. And again, it's not the job of other patrons to investigate why the dog's under the table. In many cases, you may not even know that the dog is under the table and become surprised when he emerges from under the table, because a well-trained service dog will not necessarily stick out once the training's complete. He may just disappear under a table and you won't even know he's there. But again, that's not a given. So he could lie next to the table. He could lie next to the seat. He could sit there. He may be alerting even. He may be working in that moment. Maybe he's alerting the person with a gluten allergy, hey, don't eat that. There's gluten in there. You ordered a non-gluten meal, but they gave you one with gluten, and I'm telling you, don't put that in your mouth. Service dogs can alert to that. So that's a completely invisible disability. And it could be celiac disease. So a dog could alert a person with celiac disease to gluten in food, even though they ordered gluten-free food. That could be very important, obviously. So just because there isn't equipment doesn't mean it's not a service dog either. Usually the behavior of a dog in public, if he's fully trained, the service dogs in training, that's a little bit of a different story. But dogs that are fully trained, usually with their behavior, make it very clear that they are trained service dogs and they're supposed to be there and they're legitimate. The ones that are poorly behaved are either in training or they may be fake. But again, it's not everybody's job to investigate that. Let the businesses that admit people into their buildings, let the office managers, let the front desk staff, let the people who are actually in charge of those buildings ask those questions, because they will when the dog comes in. Once he's inside, okay. So what are the questions that somebody in a business may ask before a dog is allowed in? They can ask two questions. They can ask, is this a service dog? Which is a yes or no question. And the person will answer those questions with a yes or no. If it's a no, well, out. If it's a yes, okay. The next question would be, or the next question is, what service does this dog provide? And that is a legitimate question. That is not an offbeat question. The business is allowed to ask, what service does this dog provide? Now, the person with a disability does not have to go into details. That would be crossing the line. So if somebody asks, my girlfriend Sarah, she has a service dog, Storm. So, and he's a cardiac support dog. He also does mobility tasks, but he's primarily a cardiac support dog. So if the question is asked, was one asked when I took him to visit her in a hospital during a hospital stay a year ago. And the front desk staff asked, what service does he provide? They looked at their binder and checked what the questions were. And I said, he's a cardiac support dog. And that is the answer to that question. They do not get to ask, well, what cardiac conditions does she have and what exactly does he do for her? These questions are not okay because they are invasive. They invade her privacy and she doesn't have to share that. Now, in this case, it was a hospital. They could have just looked it up in a record what she has, right? But in reality, in a restaurant, that's not the case. But the question is, what service does he provide is fair. He's a diabetic alert dog. He's a psychiatric support dog. He's a cardiac support dog. He's a mobility support dog. Those are the answers people will give who understand the law and understand their rights. And then that's the end of that. If the dog then goes and behaves in a way that is disruptive to the business can still remove the dog. If a dog is acting aggressively, that was let in under the right answers to those questions, and then poops on the floor, can be asked to leave. So there are parameters under which a service dog, even a legitimate service dog, may be removed from a building or a restaurant by the restaurant owner, but not by other patrons. So there's a couple of things about the questions and the access that comes with it. So another thing to consider for everybody who doesn't have a service dog, the interference with a service dog at work is a misdemeanor in the state of California. It may vary by the state you're in, of what crime you're committing, but you're interfering with a service dog and the work of a service dog, you're committing a misdemeanor, and it can end you 6 months in jail. Just think about that for a moment. You could look this up in the California Civil Code. I forgot the exact paragraph number. But interfering with a service dog is a misdemeanor punishable by up to 6 months in jail and a monetary fine. I think somewhere between around $2,000 or so. Interfering with the preventing access of a service dog into a building is also it's also a misdemeanor. And service dog fraud, passing off your dog as a service dog when he's not or she's not, it's also a misdemeanor. And all these carry sentences of either monetary fines or jail time or both. So those are serious offenses. So it would be good for everybody to not interfere with service dogs. And the laws are just mentioned there for California, but many states have laws on the books that clarify of what the penalties are. And if you end up calling the cops, they may or may not know of these provisions because they're not that well known. That doesn't change the fact that they exist and they're real and they can absolutely be charged with that. And people have been charged with that. You can find several cases of business owners who threw people with service dogs out or didn't let them in and cost them a pretty penny. And there were actually some even who went to jail for a little bit. So this is not that this doesn't happen. It does happen. So it is important for businesses especially to understand what the rules are, what the laws are, and what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do for their own business safety and their business license safety and freedom. But it's also important for everybody in the general public to understand that you should just leave the service dogs alone and not interfere with their work in any way. And when you talk to them, when you address them, when you pet them, when you touch them, when you try to engage in some way because the dog is so cute, you are doing that. So you could be could be stepping straight into a jail cell there. Obviously, there's degrees of disrupting service dogs, but let's say the dog misses something and there's a serious harm to the person, you can rest assured that there will be serious consequences for you for doing so, regardless of if you were aware of that or not, that that's a crime, because it is. So just keep that in mind. So let me give you one last thing to think of in relationship to your own dogs and service dogs. Let's say you live in a residential neighborhood or you're out camping or wherever you are with your dog and you have a nice friendly dog. Generally, nice friendly dog, not really a problem behavior in sight. And somebody walks by with a service dog. And your dog comes and engages with that dog. And that interaction turns into a dog fight for whatever reason. Circumstances, your dog was feeling bad, whatever it is. And it wasn't started by the service dog, but it was started by your dog somehow. Whatever the freak circumstances were that led to it, maybe completely out of character, or maybe that dog just didn't like that dog. Huh? Some dogs just don't like other dogs. And now that service dog ends up getting injured. And it's not even so much the physical injury, it's the attack itself that is problematic, because the psychological trauma of that makes that dog no longer be able to work. What do you think is going to happen next in that scenario? If your loose dog messed with a service dog, the ramifications of that will be rather expensive. Really, really expensive. Because now you've caused emotional distress to someone who no longer has a service dog and needs to get another one retrained. The damage to their dog can maybe the psychological damage, not the physical so much, depending on the injuries, obviously, but the psychological trauma of the attack may make that dog completely useless, in air quotes, as a service dog. And can no longer work. They need a new dog. They no longer have a dog for the period of time it takes to retrain. There's emotional distress from that. That price tag goes through the roof for you because your dog was loose. So I don't mean to scare anybody, but these consequences can become very expensive and pretty intense rather quickly. So just be aware that your actions, your interactions with service dogs, your dog's interaction with a service dog can have a very detrimental impact on the person with a disability, because all they want to do is really get through the day. They have no other interest in just going about their day and not be bothered and getting back home, because they don't probably have enough energy to do all these things on their own. That's why they have a service dog and they need the help. And the last thing they need is external factors impacting their life more than it already is based on their disabilities. So just keep that in mind when you see a service dog or your dog's around you and he's maybe not on a leash. Maybe clip him on a leash when you see a service dog, just to make sure nothing happens. It's always better to err on the side of some care than on the side of carelessness when it comes to that. And then the last point, and that's not so much directly related to dogs, but while we're on the topic of interacting, people with disabilities also do not want to get asked what their disabilities are or what's wrong with them, which should be obvious, but apparently it's not. So we've seen things that when you go out with service dogs in public, it's just phenomenal, phenomenally stupid what some people will do, and you just shake your head sometimes. We had somebody pull the tail of a service dog in an elevator. Which I think of that. You pull the tail of a dog in an elevator. First of all, why would you pull a tail of a dog you don't know to begin with? It's not your dog, but a service dog. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you run into, right? Or people will straight up, hey, why do you have that dog? What's wrong with you? That's just so inappropriate on like every imaginary level. That's just, why do you even go with that? What's wrong with you? The answer should probably be he was assigned to me upon my release. There was some issues. But okay, that's a joke answer. It's not a real answer. But yeah, so people with service dogs are just trying to get through the day. That's really the key message here. And it is best if general public, nobody bothers their service dog and nobody bothers them. They're just having enough going on. They're dealing with enough issues. They're having enough problems to deal with in their life. And the last thing they need is additional friction, tension, and drama. So they're just trying to get through the day. So I hope that gave you some insights onto service dogs in public and maybe some additional things to think about if you are generally a friendly person and you just like the dog and it's cute and think it's okay to say hello, start, or talking to the dog, or even just admiring the dog and it's how beautiful it is can be a problem. So these are the things that are not as obvious as touching him. Obviously, that's touching him is straightforward. I think most people know that part. But some of these other aspects may be not as straightforward. Also, the invisible disabilities are often something that is not as considered and not considered as much as the visible ones. Obviously, if somebody's missing an arm, it's pretty straightforward, right? But if somebody has an invisible disability like the ones I mentioned, you can't see any of that. It's not visible to the outside world that there is something very serious going on inside that human being. And a service dog is probably gonna get them through the day, so not bothering that dog is kind of important. Okay, so I hope you found this interesting, helpful, informative, and you got something out of it, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.